Le'ilui Nishmas, of the elevation of the Neshama of Avram ben Yonah Yaakov, and also for Almog ben Yigal, who was our adopted hostage. We're on page 21, and we're up to chapter 2. So really what we've done up to now is we did the introduction, and then following that, we did really what is the theory of the higher pattern, which is going to enable us to be living inspired people. And now we start off with some applications, okay? So we're taking the pattern that we spoke about last time, and don't worry, we'll go over it, even if you weren't here or didn't manage to hear the shir last time, we will go over it as we go along. So chapter 2 on page 21, inspiration and disappointment, or why a good time never lasts, okay? Something familiar. The natural pathway of all life experiences begins with inspiration and soon fades to disappointment. Let us analyze this phenomenon and understand it, okay? And I should say as well that the more we learn about this, hopefully we'll be able to stop it fading to that disappointment. And we'll be able to sort of maintain that level of inspiration and see, once we understand where this process happens and how it happens, we'll hopefully be able to understand a little bit better how we can make sure to keep the good times lasting. Human consciousness, he continues, and human senses are tuned to an initial burst of sensitivity and then rapidly decay into dullness. Sights, sounds, smells, even tactile stimuli, things that we touch, are felt sharply at first and then hardly at all. A constant sound is not registered. One suddenly becomes aware that it was present only when it stops. We are incapable of maintaining the freshness of any experience naturally. By the way, I was thinking about this today because I've started recently to teach a group in what's called the after school base, which is a group of boys, years 7 and 8, and we learn some Gemara after school. Now, often, as a reward for their learning, they have chips. And the chips are, for them to enjoy afterwards. They're ordered from Piazza, and it's a big treat for them. Now, the thing is, if there are spare chips, then the way it works is that the person giving the shir gets to take the chips home. So I have often come home with 1 or 2 packets of chips to the delight of my children. And the funny thing is that although every time it's like, oh, wow, thank you so much. The first time it's like, wow, where did you get chips from? Thank you so much. And the second time it's like, oh, there's chips again. And by the time you get to the third or the fourth time, it's like, oh, you must have had after school base. It's like, and it's the same with anything in life, isn't it? The first time is like, wow, exciting experience. Then, okay, it just becomes normal. It becomes normal. And even more than that, what he's saying is actually our senses become dulled to it. And whenever we don't have that same experience, and you know what we do? We find ourselves like searching for the previous experience. You know what I mean? We find ourselves sort of wondering why, or searching for that first time we ever did it, the first time we ever had that experience, and finding it hard to... And we find that we're frustrated because we can't find that original experience. So this is the phenomenon. We're all familiar with this. He says, we're incapable of maintaining the freshness of any experience naturally. Only in the dimension of miracle is that possible. The sacrificial bread in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple, remains steaming fresh permanently to manifest the constant freshness of Hashem's relationship with the Jewish people, right? The showbread, the lechem haponim, which is placed in the temple of Beis HaMikdash, stayed fresh. The miracle is it stayed fresh from week to week, from one Shabbat until it was removed the following Shabbat. And he says the depth of that miracle is to show us that all things in life naturally go stale. The only way this is able to stay fresh is because it's miraculous. It's really of another world. It's of the spiritual world more than the physical. Therefore, this bread is able to stay fresh. I once heard a very nice idea, actually. Why is it that we always use wine for any sort of Jewish occasion? Okay, grape juice, wine, right? We always use wine and make a cup, whether it's a kiddush that we're going to make, whether it's a havdalah that we're going to make, on a Shabbos, on a Yom Tov, at a wedding, at a bris, There's always a cup of wine, and you're making a bracha over the cup of wine together with whatever the actual kind of ceremony, whatever the mitzvah is. So I once had a very nice idea, which was everything in this world becomes stale. Everything, the longer you use it, the longer it stays out, it becomes stale naturally. That's what happens. It decays. That's the natural process. Wine is the only product which becomes better with age. If you buy a wine that's been aged, that's much better. It's a better wine, right? And even if you leave it for, you could leave it for years in the bottle, so they tell me. And as long as you do it right and the right conditions and the cork and everything, it becomes better with age. So therefore, what we're trying to say is that this experience that we're having now, whether it's a Shabbos or a Yom Tov, or it's a wedding, or it's a bris, this should be an experience which actually gets better with age. This shouldn't become stale. This should be something which actually only improves because it's got that spiritual element to it. But these, as we said, are the exceptions. But what happens normally in the natural world is that things actually become worse or dulled over time. The natural pathway, he says, is that things which are fresh become stale. The bottom page 21. One of the Torah's sources for this idea lies in the sequence of events surrounding the exodus from Egypt. Okay? Jewish people leaving Egypt at an extremely low point in our history during the intense misery of slavery in Egypt. Literally at the point of spiritual annihilation. We're told the Jewish people are at almost the lowest possible level, and one level below that, they would have been Egyptians. They would have been the same, identical as the Egyptians. And from that point, the Jewish people were uplifted miraculously. The 10 plagues revealed God's presence and might, culminating in a night of unprecedented revelation with the 10th plague. This spiritual high was amplified by many orders of magnitude at the splitting of the sea, meaning we go straight from the 10 plagues, from that high, to the high point of the splitting of the sea. The lowliest of the Jewish people experienced more than the highest prophet subsequently. And suddenly, once they came through the sea, they were deposited in a desert with many days of work ahead of them to climb to the spiritual status of meriting the Sinai experience, the giving of the Torah. Meaning what happens is we go from the lowest level in Egypt, lowest level you could possibly be at spiritually. And we're catapulted in such a short space of time, literally in the matter of days, we are catapulted to the highest level, where at the splitting of the sea, we're told that the person who was the most basic, simple Jew saw more than the greatest of the prophets. That is an unbelievable spiritual revelation. And that happens in such a short space of time. And then we see that everything drops and we go to the desert. And we're told the Jewish people have to work and they have to build their way up to the giving of the Torah, to the Sinai experience. He continues, mystically, a desert means a place of intense death forces, a place of lethal ordeals. No water means no life. And we see later the potency of the ordeals which face them in the desert, right? There are many times where the Jewish people, while they're traveling in the desert, they do lose their faith and they're challenged and they complain against God and there are plagues and there are all sorts of things, troubles that happen in the desert. What is the meaning of this pattern? He continues. Meaning, what's the idea that the Jewish people are catapulted to this high level, then they're back down into the desert? And you start to see where he's going with this. The idea is, in order to save the Jewish people in Egypt, outside help was necessary. God appeared and elevated us spiritually, although we did not deserve it intrinsically. We had not yet earned it. That's the first stage. God gave it to us. God elevated us externally, even though we didn't really own that. It wasn't really part of who we were and part of our identity. It kind of like had to be done. God had to step in. But once we were saved, page 23, once we were inspired, once made conscious of our higher reality, then the price must be paid. The experience must be earned. And in working to earn the level which was previously given artificially, one acquires that level genuinely. Instead of being shown a spiritual level, one becomes it. Which means that us as an entire nation didn't really deserve to have the heights that we had with the 10 plagues and the miracles. But God knew that was the only way to get us out. Once he had taken us out of Egypt, now we're back to reality. And the reality of the Jewish people is we had a long way to go. We had a lot of work that needed to be done, but that work was critical in order to become the level that God had given to us externally. And you start to see both parts are necessary. If we would never have had that external impetus at the beginning, we would have stayed in Egypt. We wouldn't have left. And we would have just continued sinking. Once we had that, though, then if we would never have built it up for ourselves, that inspiration would have just dulled. That inspiration would have just died after a while, because it's only going to happen, it's only going to work for a certain amount of time. And therefore, again, you see these two phases, just that we spoke about right at the beginning, the Zachar and the Keva, the 1, the 2, the 3, all of these different stages are necessary. He continues, and that is the secret of life. A person is inspired artificially, at the beginning of any phase of life, but to acquire the depth of personality which is demanded of us, Hashem removes the inspiration. It's interesting. He sort of characterizes this not as just a natural phenomenon, as in the dulling of our physical senses, which is clearly a natural thing, but rather he says almost like that's the way God built human beings, that we have to function in this way. And therefore his desire is that the inspiration is removed. That inspiration which is there for the beginning can never last. And God doesn't want it to last either, because it's from the outside. He continues, the danger following this is apathy and depression. The challenge is to fight back to the point of inspiration. And in so doing, to build it permanently into one's character, which means that which we had externally, which came from outside of us, can now be worked upon until it becomes part of my identity, part of who I am. The plagues in Egypt and the splitting of the sea are dazzling beyond description. But then God puts us in the desert and challenges us to fight through to Sinai. In Egypt, he demonstrates destruction of 10 levels of evil, while we just watch passively. In the desert, he brings 10 levels of evil to bear against us and challenges us to destroy them. All of the troubles and the travails the Jewish people have in the desert are not as dramatic as the 10 plagues, and there is no miraculous assistance in order to save us. Rather, Hashem says, you guys need to figure this out on your own. This is a different type of challenge. This is the type of challenge where you can build yourselves by overcoming it. But I'm waiting and I'm watching and I'm hoping, and I gave you the initial push. I gave you the initial inspiration. You can do this, but you've got to do it on your own. Just, as way of as a parent, when one thinks about this and one thinks about their children, and we're doing this all the time, really, if you think about it. When a child goes to school, it's always a strange thing because they have this whole world that you're not aware of. Right? As a parent, you kind of cocoon them and you protect them and you're always with them and you love and warmth. And then they go off to school. Now, I see the school end, and for the parents, don't worry, we're very nice and kind at school, right? Tali, Jesse was happy, yeah. But nevertheless, there's this whole world, and they have to navigate that by themselves. And you're not there, and you're not holding their hand, and you can't. And if you try to hold their hand too much, that's actually destructive for the child. The child needs to be in their own space. So what do? We give them, whether it's at the beginning of their lives, whether it's throughout their lives, at the time that we're together, we give them that push, if you like, that inspiration. And by the way, the biggest thing I think, certainly seeing from both as a parent and as a teacher, is that we allow them to believe in themselves. We give them that belief in themselves, not because they're the cleverest, not because they're the best at everything, but in who they are themselves. We show them, these are your talents, these are your strengths, this is what you're really good at, and we believe in you. And all of that is the external. All of that is the inspiration that we give them. But ultimately, the way that they're really going to build themselves is when they have to do it by themselves, when there are lots of other people around and it's not you. And then they take the belief, the inspiration, the love, the warmth, everything that we've given them in the home. And then suddenly, before you know it, they're an 18-year-old and they're a 19-year-old. They're making their own decisions. They're not even asking you anymore by that time. But we hope and pray that they've contained, imbued within their personality, at least some, if not a lot, of those ideas and those things that we've tried to teach them, but it's no longer coming from me. It's actually coming from within themselves. And that's the best. You don't want it to come. If you still have to tell them everything when they're, 20, 25, 30, apart from the fact they're not listening to you anymore, but that's not what you want. You want it to be from within themselves. So again, this pattern where it has to be, there's the external stimulus, then there's the challenging part, which is them building it up, really making that become part of them. And then there's the finished product where it's now become their own identity. And really that's what Hashem is doing to the Jewish people as well. That's B'ni B'chori Yisrael. It says that we're described as God's firstborn. We're described as the child, as the son, as the child of Hashem, in the same respect, where God lifts us up and he says, right, now you have to do this by yourself. Now you have to make your own identity as a nation and make sure that you build into that identity what it means to be part of the Jewish people. He continues, page 23 in the middle. This idea recurs everywhere. Pesach, the festival of Pesach, when we celebrate the fact that we leave Egypt, that occurs in Nisan. The zodiac, the mazal of this month is the sheep, an animal which is passive. Okay, the sheep is a very passive animal. It goes where the shepherd tells it to go. The next comes Iyar, which is the ox. an animal which has its own willful strength. You don't tell an ox, a bull, where to go. You try to make sure that you can kind of navigate for it or direct or encourage it to go in the right place. You don't order the thing around. That's Iyar, working it out on our own. And thereafter comes Sivan, twins, which is perfect harmony. It is like a father teaching his child to walk. First, the father supports the child as he takes his first step, but then the father must let go. There is no other way to learn, and the child must take a frightened and lonely step unaided. Only then, when he can walk independently, can he feel his father's love in the very moment which previously felt like a desertion. By the way, the father that steps in at the point where the child falls over, and before they fall over, catches them, they're not doing the child any favor. They're doing themselves a favor because it's hard for the parent to see, but they're not doing the child. The child needs to be able to learn, needs to be able to have that independence. And then, of course, when they can walk by themselves, that's the great joy. Unfortunately, he continues, most people do not know this secret. We are misled into thinking that the world is supposed to be a constant thrill, and we feel only half alive because it is not. Let us examine some applications of this fundamental principle. So now what we're going to go on to do next week is we're going to examine some of the different sort of real life situations in which this takes place and the confusion that exists. Because once you can identify these three stages, then you can start to see that if we're always looking for the first stage, which is the thrill, which is the inspiration, which is the external stimulus, if we're always searching for that and that's all we want in life, then we will by definition become frustrated because we will never be able to stay at that phase forever. And if we try, we'll be constantly trying to search for external stimulus more and bigger. And every time our senses are dulled, it'll need to be bigger and better and more than it ever was before. That's going to be a very, very challenging place to be. Very, very challenging existence. So as much as identifying the three stages, we also have to identify really counterfeit. There are certain things which seem to be right. They sometimes seem to, whether it's enjoyable, fun, pleasurable, etc., but those are not necessarily what's actually going to bring us to that ultimate level of joy. So let's try, over the week ahead, let's try to have in mind different experiences that we have throughout our lives. I brought a couple of examples, but there are so many different experiences throughout our lives where there are these three stages. There's the external stimulus, followed by the hard work that we have to put in, and then that final stage, which is the joy, which is the really being able to do it on our own and it becoming part of our character. Thank you very much. We're going to end there.